Dad hit me across the face and dragged me out of the house by my hair. I was 30 years old. One phone call later, everything they'd built over decades was crumbling around them. When I discovered what they'd been hiding all these years, I realized why they were so desperate to keep me quiet. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who'd have to choose between family and survival. But sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones you need protection from. My name is Cassandra, and this story starts on what should have been the most ordinary Tuesday of my life, March 15th, 2024. I remember the exact date because it's burned into my memory like a scar. I was driving through the winding streets of Millbrook Heights, a quiet suburb about 20 minutes outside of Portland, Oregon. The kind of neighborhood where the houses all have perfectly manicured lawns, and the biggest drama is usually someone's garbage can being left out too long after pickup day. I just finished a particularly exhausting day at Morrison & Associates, the law firm where I work as a senior paralegal. We'd been buried under discovery documents for a massive corporate lawsuit, and I'd spent the better part of 9 hours cross-referencing financial records and insurance claims. My eyes were burning from staring at screens. My shoulders ached from hunching over filing cabinets. And all I wanted was to go home to my small but cozy apartment in Southeast Portland, pour myself a glass of wine, and pretend the world didn't exist for a few hours. But I had one stop to make first. My mother, Elena Blackwood, had called me that morning in a panic about some insurance paperwork. She'd been dealing with a claim for damage to their roof from a recent storm, and apparently the insurance company was asking for additional documentation that she couldn't locate. "Cassie, honey, you know how hopeless your father and I are with all this legal nonsense. Could you possibly swing by after work? I know you're busy, but we're just so confused about what they're asking for." I should mention that my parents, Elena and Victor Blackwood, had always treated me like their personal administrative assistant. Ever since I'd graduated with my paralegal certification 7 years ago, I'd become their go-to person for anything involving contracts, insurance, taxes, or really any document more complicated than a grocery list. Part of me resented it, but a larger part of me had accepted it as the price of being the responsible child. You see, I was the only child who'd stayed local. My older brother Marcus had moved to Seattle right after college and rarely came home except for major holidays. My younger sister Isabel lived in Los Angeles, chasing dreams of becoming an actress and maintaining just enough contact to avoid being completely written out of the family will. That left me as the designated fixer, the one who showed up when the printer wasn't working, when the cable company needed to be called, when important papers needed to be filed. Don't get me wrong, I loved my parents. At least, I thought I did. They'd given me a stable childhood, paid for my education, and had always been supportive of my career choices. Sure, they could be demanding, and yes, they had a tendency to treat me more like an employee than a daughter sometimes, but I'd convinced myself that this was just what family looked like. This was what being a good daughter meant. So there I was, driving down Elm Street toward their house at 1247 Rosewood Avenue, a 2-story colonial they'd bought 15 years earlier when Victor's construction business was doing particularly well. The house had always been their pride and joy. White shutters, red brick facade, a wraparound porch that Elena spent hours decorating for every season and holiday. I pulled into their driveway behind Victor's black F-150 and Elena's silver Honda Accord. Both cars were there, which was normal for a Tuesday evening. Victor usually got home from the construction site around 5 p.m., and Elena worked from home doing bookkeeping for several small businesses in the area. But as I walked up the front steps, I noticed something odd. The porch light was on even though it was still daylight. Elena was obsessive about not wasting electricity, and she never turned on outdoor lights until after sunset. It was a small thing, barely worth noting, but it stuck with me. I knocked once and then used my key to let myself in. "Mom, Dad, I'm here with those insurance forms." The first thing that hit me was the silence. Not the comfortable quiet of an evening at home, but something heavier, more tense. It felt like the air itself was holding its breath.
Their living room looked exactly the same as always. Beige couch with too many throw pillows, Victor's recliner positioned perfectly in front of the 65-inch TV that had been his big purchase last Christmas, and Elena's collection of ceramic angels displayed on every available surface. But something was wrong with the people in it. Victor was standing near the fireplace, not sitting in his usual spot. He was wearing his work clothes, jeans covered in dust and paint stains, a flannel shirt that had seen better days, and steel-toed boots that Elena usually made him take off at the door. But he was perfectly still, staring at nothing, his hands clenched into fists at his sides.
Elena was at the kitchen table, visible through the open doorway that connected the living room to the kitchen. She was sitting ramrod straight in one of the wooden chairs, her hands folded in front of her like she was praying, or maybe trying to keep them from shaking. She was still in her work clothes, too, dark slacks and a cream-colored blouse, but they looked wrinkled, like she'd been sitting in that same position for hours. Neither of them looked at me when I walked in. Neither of them said hello. It was like they were both frozen, waiting for something to happen or trying very hard to prevent something from happening. "Hello?" I said again, louder this time. "I brought the insurance documents you needed." That's when Victor finally moved. He turned toward me with this expression I'd never seen before. Not anger, exactly, but something cold and calculating. His usually warm brown eyes looked almost black, and there were lines around them I hadn't noticed before, deep creases that made him look older than his 58 years. "Where are the papers?" he asked. Not, "Hello, Cassie," or "Thanks for coming by," or "How was your day?" Just a flat, emotionless demand. I reached into my leather messenger bag and pulled out the manila folder I'd prepared. Inside were copies of the original insurance policy, photographs of the roof damage I'd taken with my phone during my last visit, receipts for temporary repairs Victor had made, and a completed claim supplementation form that I'd filled out based on the information Elena had given me over the phone. I held out the folder, but instead of taking it, Victor just stared at it like it might explode. "What else do you have in there?" he asked, nodding toward my bag. "What do you mean? Just my normal work stuff. Why?" "Show me." This was getting weird. I mean, genuinely bizarre. In 30 years of being Victor Blackwood's daughter, he had never once demanded to search through my personal belongings. He wasn't a controlling parent. If anything, he'd always been almost too hands-off, too trusting. But something in his tone made me comply. I opened my bag wider so he could see inside. My laptop, a few case files I'd been reviewing, my wallet, keys, phone charger, the usual detritus of a working woman's daily life. He seemed to relax slightly, but only slightly. "Elena," he called toward the kitchen, "she's got the papers." My mother finally looked up, and I was shocked by what I saw. Elena Blackwood was one of those women who took pride in always looking put together. She did her hair and makeup every morning, even on days when she wasn't leaving the house. She coordinated her outfits and accessories. She was the type of person who would rather be late than leave the house without lipstick. But the woman staring at me from the kitchen table looked like she'd been through a hurricane. Her usually perfectly styled blonde hair was flat on one side and sticking up on the other, like she'd been running her hands through it. Her makeup was smudged, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. And her hands, I could see them trembling even from across the room. "Mom, are you okay? You look like you haven't slept in days." She opened her mouth to answer, but Victor cut her off. "She's fine. We're both fine. Just give us the paperwork and you can go." "Go? I just got here. And what do you mean, give you the paperwork? Don't you want me to explain what I found? The insurance company is asking for additional documentation because there's a discrepancy in the timeline you provided. I think I can help you fix it, but we need to go through it together." I'd spent hours on their case, cross-referencing their claim with weather reports, contractor estimates, and local building permits. I'd found several issues that could potentially delay or reduce their payout, but I'd also found solutions. This wasn't just a simple document drop-off. This was the kind of detailed insurance consultation that would normally cost them hundreds of dollars if they'd hired a lawyer. But Victor didn't seem interested in my help.
If anything, he seemed annoyed by it. "We don't need you to explain anything," he said. "We just need the papers." "But Dad, there are some problems with your original claim that I think we should—" "I said we don't need you to explain anything." The volume and anger in his voice made me take a step back. Victor had always been a gentleman, soft-spoken and patient. Even when I was a teenager, making typically terrible teenage decisions, he'd never raised his voice at me. The few times I'd seen him truly angry were always at work-related issues. Contractors who didn't show up, suppliers who delivered the wrong materials, that sort of thing. Never at family. But there was something else in his voice now, something that made the hair on my arm stand up. Not just anger, but fear. Desperation, maybe. Like he was trying very hard to control a situation that was rapidly spinning out of his control. Elena stood up from the kitchen table and walked into the living room. Up close, I could see that she'd been crying. Her mascara had left faint black tracks down her cheeks, and her eyes were red and swollen. And her hands, I could see them trembling even from across the room. "Cassie, sweetheart, your father is right. We really just need you to leave the papers and go home. We can handle it from here."
Handle what from here? Mom, you called me this morning in a panic because you couldn't understand what the insurance company was asking for. I've spent my entire evening figuring out how to fix your claim, and now you're acting like I'm some kind of intruder. What's going on? They looked at each other. It was one of those married couple looks that contains an entire conversation. Questions asked, answered, decisions made, strategies agreed upon. But instead of making me feel included in their family dynamic, it made me feel like an outsider. Like there was something happening that I wasn't supposed to know about. "You know what?" I said. "Forget the insurance company's questions for a minute. Let's talk about what's really going on here. You both look like you haven't slept in a week. Dad, you're acting like I'm here to rob you instead of help you. Mom, you're clearly upset about something that has nothing to do with roof damage. So why don't you tell me what's really happening?" That's when everything went wrong. Victor's face changed. The fake calm disappeared, replaced by something raw and desperate. "You need to stop asking questions," he said. "You need to stop digging around in things that don't concern you." "Digging around in what? I'm trying to help you with your insurance claim." "Bullshit," he exploded. "You're not here about insurance. You're here because you've been snooping around, asking questions, making phone calls. We know what you've been doing." I stared at him, completely bewildered. "What are you talking about? What phone calls? Snooping around where? Dad, I work downtown at a law firm. I come here maybe twice a month to help you with paperwork. What could I possibly be snooping around about?" But even as I said it, something clicked in the back of my mind. Over the past few months, I had been noticing things, small things, inconsistencies that my paralegal training had taught me to spot, like how Victor's construction business seemed to be doing better than ever, despite the fact that he'd been complaining for years about losing contracts to bigger companies. Suddenly they had new cars, expensive electronics, home renovations that must have cost tens of thousands of dollars. Like how Elena had started working with several new clients for her bookkeeping business, but she was always vague about who they were or what kind of businesses they ran. Like how they'd started taking vacations, real vacations, not just camping trips to the coast, to places like Hawaii and Las Vegas. Cash vacations, where they'd come home with stories about expensive dinners and shows and shopping sprees. And there was the way they'd been acting around money lately. Victor had always been careful with finances, the type of man who saved up for months before making any significant purchase. But recently, he'd been spending like someone who had access to a lot more cash than a small-time construction contractor should have. When I'd asked about it, casually, not suspiciously, they'd given me vague answers about good contracts and new business opportunities. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I'd been happy for them, actually. After years of financial stress, it seemed like they were finally getting ahead. But now, looking at Victor's panicked face and Elena's tear-stained cheeks, I was starting to wonder if there was more to their recent prosperity than they'd let on. "Dad, I said carefully. What exactly do you think I've been snooping around about? His face went from red to purple. Don't play dumb with me, Cassandra. We know you've been asking questions at the bank. We know you've been calling our clients. We know you've been looking into things that are none of your damn business. I haven't been calling your clients. I don't even know who your clients are. And what bank? What are you talking about? But even as I protested, I realized there might be some truth to what he was saying. Not intentional snooping, but professional habit. As a paralegal, I'd been trained to notice patterns, inconsistencies, red flags. And over the past few months, I had been noticing things about my parents' financial situation that didn't quite add up. Look, I said, if you're talking about the fact that I've noticed you guys seem to be doing better financially, then yes, I've noticed that. But I haven't been investigating you, or calling anyone, or snooping around. I've been happy for you. I thought your business was finally taking off. Elena started crying harder. Victor, maybe we should just... No, he cut her off. She needs to understand. She needs to learn to keep her mouth shut and mind her own business. That's when I got angry. Really angry. Mind your own business? You called me here. You asked for my help. You've been treating me like your personal legal assistant for years, and now I'm supposed to mind my own business? You're supposed to help when we ask for help and stay out of it when we don't. You're supposed to be grateful for everything we've given you instead of acting like some kind of detective. Grateful? Grateful for what? For being your free legal advice service? For dropping everything every time you need help with paperwork? For being the only family member who still lives close enough to deal with your problems?
You want to know what I think, Dad? I think you're right. I think there is something going on that you don't want me to know about. And you know what? I'm starting to think I should find out what it is. That's when he hit me. The slap came so fast, I didn't see it coming. 1 second, I was standing in their living room, arguing like we were having a normal family disagreement, and the next second, my head was snapping to the side and my cheek was on fire. I stumbled backward, more from shock than from the force of the blow, and reached up to touch my face. My cheek was already starting to swell, and I could taste blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my mouth. For a moment, none of us moved. Victor looked as shocked as I felt, like he couldn't believe what he'd just done. Elena had her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face, and I just stood there, staring at the man who had raised me, trying to process what had just happened. Victor Blackwood had never laid a hand on me in anger. Ever. Even during my most rebellious teenage years, even when I'd gotten arrested for underage drinking, even when I'd wrecked his truck by driving it into a ditch, he had never hit me. But he just slapped me across the face like I was a disobedient child, and the look in his eyes told me he wasn't done. "You need to leave," he said, but his voice was shaking now. "You need to leave, and you need to forget whatever you think you know." "Dad," I started, but I didn't know how to finish the sentence. I said leave. But instead of leaving, I made the mistake of asking one more question. "What are you so afraid I'm going to find out?" That's when he completely lost it. Victor lunged forward, grabbed a fistful of my hair, and started dragging me toward the front door. I'm not a small woman. I'm 5'7" and reasonably strong, but he outweighed me by 60 pounds and had the advantage of surprise. "You want to know what I'm afraid of?" he screamed, pulling my hair so hard that tears sprang to my eyes. "I'm afraid of nosy daughters who don't know when to keep their mouths shut. I'm afraid of people who ask too many questions and cause problems for everyone." Elena was following us, crying and pleading with him to stop, but she didn't try to intervene. She just watched as her husband dragged their 30-year-old daughter across the living room like a rag doll. The physical pain was bad enough. My scalp felt like it was on fire, and I was pretty sure he was pulling out chunks of my hair. But the emotional pain was worse. This was my father, the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had walked me down the aisle at my high school graduation, who had co-signed my first apartment lease because I didn't have enough credit history. And he was dragging me out of his house by my hair because I'd asked too many questions about his sudden wealth. He hauled me all the way to the front door, then shoved me so hard that I fell down the porch steps and landed on my hands and knees in the driveway. The concrete scraped skin off my palms and tore holes in my work pants. "Don't come back," he yelled from the doorway. "Don't call, don't visit, don't contact us at all until you learn to keep your nose out of places it doesn't belong." I picked myself up off the driveway, brushing gravel out of my torn palms, and looked back at the house where I'd grown up. Victor was standing in the doorway, breathing hard, his face still twisted with rage and fear. Elena was visible behind him, sobbing into her hands. And that's when everything crystallized for me. They weren't angry because I'd been snooping around. They were terrified because they thought I'd been snooping around, which meant there was something to find. Something big enough to make my mild-mannered father drag his daughter out of the house by her hair, something important enough to risk destroying our family relationship to protect. As I stood there in their driveway, bleeding and humiliated and trying to process what had just happened, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out what Victor and Elena Blackwood were so desperate to hide. And when I did, they were going to regret ever laying a hand on me. That one phone call I mentioned, I made it from my car before I even left their driveway. And by the time I was done, their perfect little suburban life was about to become a lot more complicated. I sat there in my Honda Civic, parked right outside their house, blood from my scraped palms staining the steering wheel, and I called Detective Maria Santos at the Portland Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. You see, what Victor and Elena didn't know was that I hadn't been snooping on purpose, but I had been paying attention, and 3 months earlier when I'd helped them organize their tax documents, I'd noticed something that didn't sit right with me. Bank deposits. Lots of them. Cash deposits in amounts just under $10,000, the federal reporting threshold, regular as clockwork, every 2 weeks for the past 18 months. For someone whose construction business was supposedly struggling, Victor was making an awful lot of unreported income.
Detective Santos? This is Cassandra Blackwood. I'm a paralegal at Morrison & Associates, and I need to report suspicious financial activity involving my parents, Victor and Elena Blackwood of 1247 Rosewood Avenue. I told her everything. The cash deposits, the sudden lifestyle changes, the expensive purchases, the way they'd panicked when they thought I was investigating them. I told her about the assault, about how desperate they'd been to get me out of their house. "Miss Blackwood," Detective Santos said, "we've actually had the Blackwood residence under surveillance for 6 weeks. Your father's construction company has been flagged as a potential front for money laundering operations connected to a larger drug trafficking investigation." My parents weren't just hiding money, they were laundering it. Victor's good contracts were payments for cleaning drug money through fake construction invoices. Elena's mysterious new bookkeeping clients were shell companies created to hide illegal transactions. And when they thought I was getting too close to the truth, they'd chosen violence over honesty. Detective Santos told me to go home and wait. Within 2 hours, I watched from my apartment window as the news broke on the local channels. Massive money laundering ring busted in Millbrook Heights neighborhood. Victor and Elena Blackwood were arrested along with 14 other people in a coordinated raid across 3 states. The investigation uncovered $2.3 million in laundered funds, fake business records going back 2 years, and connections to a drug cartel operating out of Mexico. They made bail after 3 days, but their house was seized as evidence. Their bank accounts were frozen, Victor's construction business was shut down permanently. Elena lost all her clients when her bookkeeping license was suspended pending investigation. The parents who had dragged me out of their house to protect their secret lost everything because of one phone call I made from their own driveway. They both took plea deals. Victor got 4 years in federal prison, Elena got 2 years and 5 years probation. They'll be in their 70s when they get out. And me? I testified at their sentencing hearing. I told the judge about the assault, about how they'd chosen crime over family, violence over honesty. Sometimes, the people who hurt you give you exactly the tools you need to destroy them. Victor and Elena taught me to notice financial irregularities, to ask the right questions, to trust my instincts when something didn't add up. They just never expected me to use those skills on them. That one phone call didn't just put them in prison, it set me free.